This took place mid-July of 2020. I live in the city, but I often drive down to my hometown, just to get away from the hustle and bustle and enjoy some quiet. I prefer to go on my hikes alone, sometimes with or without my dog, depending on what animals I'm trying to observe. And this time, I chose to go alone. So I parked my car at the river, just a few miles from the woods I want to walk through. There's just something about being able to see everything illuminated by the moonlight and hearing the coyotes that makes me feel at peace. I finally made it halfway down the dirt road that led to the woods. I stopped for a moment because I felt a whoosh of really cold air. I thought that was so strange because it was a muggy Indiana night, around 80 degrees. I stayed there for a moment, looking around to see if there was any logical explanation for the draft I could see with my eyes, but nada. At that point, I looked directly above me and saw 3 baby raccoons trying to sleep on a branch just above my head. I remembered thinking to myself, that's kind of odd. Aren't raccoons nocturnal? This should be their bread and butter right now. I appreciated them for a moment and kept on. I get another 500 feet down the road and whoosh, another cold burst of air. I stopped again to try and figure out how that was happening. Clear skies, 0 wind. I couldn't think of a good explanation. Before I had too much more time to think on it, I heard something. To the right of me was mostly an unkempt hay and grass field, probably about knee-high at most. The moon was so bright, so it was impossible to get a good view of everything. I hear this rustling in the grass about 20 feet away from me, and then it stopped. I could see the animal now. I'll do my best to describe it. It was on all 4s, but it appeared it had the ability to be bipedal if it chose to. I could see the nape of its neck, down to where the animal's back legs would be. The hair on its back was very strange. It had a large, thick mohawk-like ridge along its back. From what I could see of the animal, I assume it had to weigh close to 100 pounds. Its steps were very heavy, nothing graceful at all about it. The rest of the hair on the animal's body looked similar to that of a chimpanzee, or some sort of ape. The front 2 legs were very powerful, had a broadly set stance. But the thing that messed with me the most was the sound. I'll never forget that sound. I was holding my breath, hoping I had just run across one of the many feral swamp dogs, and that he'd run off since they don't like people. I realized I was wrong. As I stood there staring, this animal started sort of loping, pacing, into a figure-8 pattern. It did this for maybe 15 seconds. And then the thing charged me. And that's when it made the sound. There was something so wrong with its breathing. This animal sounded like someone was trying to breathe but didn't have a nose, or had some serious damage to its airways. It was like a snarl, growl, and breath all in one. I could hear it snap its jaws when it backed away from the bluff charge. This all happened so fast. About another 500 feet away from where this was happening, there's an odd abandoned settler's cabin. My first thought was to get there for safety. But before I could make that choice, I heard a scream. Not a human scream. I'm not an expert, but through my many years of living in the woods and observing the different animals, I've got a good ear at knowing what animal call is what. And this scream sounded like a mountain lion. We don't even have those here, so basically had to say screw that plan for safety. Now if you continue down the dirt road past the abandoned cabin, there is a small parking lot there. The reason I didn't take my car there is because you're not supposed to be in the park at night. Kinda think I see the reasoning for that now. Well, someone else was there too. After I heard the scream, I heard a car, and then started to see the headlights come over the hill towards me by the cabin. At this point, I was flipping out. The crazy animal that had charged me was nowhere to be seen. There might be a crazed wildcat a few feet away, and now some Cutlass Supreme is hauling butt in my direction. In all my wisdom and fantastic decision-making, I dove into the hayfield to hide from the car. Yes, the same hayfield the crazy animal was in. Thankfully, they didn't see me, but they were absolutely flying, tearing out of that place like a bat out of hell. It made me wonder if they had something to do with the screaming animal, or its weird one in the field. Needless to say, I had enough of that night, and cut my way through other properties and woods to get back to the river, where my car was. This happened back in March, but there was some other crazy stuff that had happened with animals, such as possible coyotes or cougars. So in March, my friend and I decided to have a fire. Since we're in Maryland, it's still pretty cold around that time. We invited 2 friends over to join us. Side note, we normally have a stock of chicken livers to feed the fox around here, and we put them outside my father's window to watch the fox eat them. So while we were talking around the fire and drinking some beer, I had the grand idea of taking the rest of the chicken livers and putting them behind the detached garage in the woods. There's a game camera, so the plan was to put the livers in front of it to see whatever animal was lurking deeper in the woods. So I grabbed the livers, I grabbed my friend, and we go back down the 250 to 300 foot driveway. It's about 11 p.m., so we had our phone flashlights on. We get down behind the garage, and I heard walking in the woods. I told my friend to shut up and listen, and he said he didn't hear anything. We take a few more steps, and he finally hears it. We stop again and listen, and there's nothing. We're about 10 or 15 feet from the tree line, and I take one step and see movement off to my right, slightly, and I shine my phone light over there. And there was a white face looking at us from behind a fallen tree, but I didn't pay much attention to it because I was drinking. Then it starts running back and forth in front of us, right within the tree line. It's so fast and the movement seems so odd, but yet graceful for its heightened speed. We're panicking, trying to get our lights on it, and after about 10 seconds of this, both of our lights hit it, and it stops dead in its tracks. It was somewhere from 6 to 7 feet tall, super skinny. I could see its tendons in its arms and legs. Super long arms that came past its knees, obviously long legs as well. It was running on 2 feet and stopped in a weird position, not facing us, yet had its head turned towards us. It didn't really have any facial features, nothing in its eye sockets. Our phone lights reflected off its pale skin. It seemed like we sat there staring at each other for minutes. I eventually screamed and ran so fast and left my friend behind. He eventually followed suit and was running behind me. Of course, when I was running, I tripped and fell, but I just sat there listening and I didn't hear anything, so I thought we were in the clear. My friend did say that he thought he heard it running beside us in the woods while we were running back up the driveway. I had no idea what it was and felt absolutely crazy until my friend kept reassuring me that he saw it too. Throughout the night, we kept hearing walking in the woods and would get nervous. Nothing crazy has really happened in those woods since, until last night. My friend and I decided to have another fire since fall is finally in the air. It was just us two this time. We heard a weird animal that was later established as a screech owl near the bamboo in front of the woods. We also heard what sounded like a dog being beaten or attacked from the neighbors across the street's property. They have no dogs. Then finally, around 1 a.m., fire was starting to die down. Across the street again, we heard this terrifying screeching noise. I can only describe it as tires squealing and then a human yelling at the same time. We immediately put the fire out and went to go inside through the side door. As we were opening the screen door, something was running up the side of the house towards us very fast. I wish I had the courage to peek my head around the corner. We had the window cracked last night, listening for noises, and we kept hearing weird screeching noises throughout the night. Let me preface by saying this happened around 10 years ago. Also, I've always been very skeptical of paranormal stuff, and I'm not at all superstitious, but one encounter will always stick with me. I've briefly mentioned this story on random posts in the past, but I've never made a detailed explanation of what I encountered, so I figured I might as well. And this is quite long, as there's quite a few stories associated with this force, both from first-hand and second-hand accounts. I grew up with my grandparents in a quiet suburb outside Washington, D.C., and our house was only a few hundred yards from a large park called Sleepy Hollow Woods. I used to always play in the woods as a child, alone or with friends, and never had any issues. I loved the outdoors and explored the woods thoroughly. However, I would never stay out after dark, of course. My mother grew up here as well, and would always tell stories about the woods and believing they were haunted. She's had plenty of creepy things happen with her. For instance, when she was younger, they had 2 family labs. They were super friendly, and my mother and uncle would walk them through the woods all the time. One time, my mother was walking alone with the dogs around dusk when she came across what she described as a ripped-off deer haunch lying covered in blood in the middle of a trail. And there were no other deer parts, body, or blood anywhere to be seen, just this random bloody leg. She described it as having the appearance of being ripped off, definitely not cut. Obviously freaked out, she took the dogs and just started heading home. All of a sudden, near the exit of the park, the dogs completely froze in their tracks and just started growling into the tree line. This was very unlike them, as they were super friendly with both people and other animals. Also, were quite large and never feared anything. However, as my mother kept trying to pull them along and see what they were growling at, their tails went between their legs, and they started whimpering and refusing to move forward. It was then my mom said she saw a almost 8-foot-tall dark figure with glowing red eyes move between the trees, staring right at her. She immediately turned around with the dogs and fled, taking a different exit out of the woods. My uncle has also said he's seen the red-eyed giant before, but never a clear view, always a silhouette. Keep in mind, there are no bears or anything of that sort around here that could or would do that to a deer. On another occasion some years later, my mom recalled walking with our golden retriever near the woods. Again, the retriever was the sweetest dog in the world and loved everybody. But my mom came across an old creepy lady feeding and talking quietly to some wild rabbits on the trails. Immediately, our dog started growling at the woman, something my mother has never heard her do before. My mom immediately apologized to the lady and walked around her with her dog, tugging her along. As she continued to walk, she came across a circle of rabbits all standing perfectly still, just staring at her. My mom promptly ran home. My mother and uncles have other stories, but I always thought they were nonsense, either just imagining things or making them up to scare me, since I've played in those woods so many times and never had any issues. However, my older brother used to go on nightly walks through the woods, and he told me he's seen the red-eyed monster and other mysterious creepy encounters. I was around 15 or 16 at the time and loved ghost stories and never encountered anything like that. So I was able to convince him to go out ghost hunting with me. Of course, I thought it was all a bunch of silly nonsense anyway. The first time we went out, we had a few friends over. We were hanging out late at night and telling ghost stories, of course. We mentioned the haunted forest. We were living at a house down the street from our grandparents at the time, so still practically next door to the woods. My friends all thought it would be fun if we went out into the forest to search for some ghosts and monsters, and have a good laugh. We waited until it was about 2 to 2:30 a.m. and headed out. There was a fairly large group of us, about 6 to 8 people total, including my brother and myself. As we're walking through this pitch-black forest using our phones as flashlights, I kid you not, all phones turned off at the same time. Of course, the girls in our group started freaking out, to be honest. I'm pretty sure we all did. But we were also kind of laughing at the nonsense of it all. There was no noise anywhere other than us. The forest was completely dead silent. And after a few minutes, everyone was able to get their phones turned on and working again. We decided to head home at that point. Could have been a freak accident. I'm not really sure. The second time, I went with my brother and a couple of other friends. This time, a much smaller crew. I think maybe 3 or 4 of us all together. Same as before. We thought it'd be fun and silly to go out ghost hunting at night and see my brother's little Sasquatch friend. This time was different, however. The moment we entered the forest, things got weird. The forest felt unnaturally dark, and our lights barely reached the tree line on either side. We also immediately felt a large sense of dread, danger, and adrenaline, like we were being watched from all sides. Quite frankly, it was terrifying, as only moments before we were joking and laughing and telling ghost stories, but we all immediately shut up and felt it not even 30 yards from the entrance of the forest. Whatever, we continued slowly walking deeper into the woods, talking and nervously laughing as we peered about it with our flashlights. The forest was dead silent when suddenly, all at once, we heard what sounded like what could only be described as several thousand monkeys screaming and screeching at us from the treetops and tree lines all around us. The noise was overwhelmingly loud and deafening. I've never heard anything like it, or since. It's hard to describe, but angry, hateful monkeys all crying out in anger at us is the best way to describe it. And those cries were definitely targeted at us. The sense of danger and dread immediately jumped to 11, and we wasted no time in turning tail and sprinting for the forest exit. The sounds of 1,000 lost souls screaming incredibly loud, chasing us from above and around. Obviously, we saw no animals or anything in the trees or around us when flashing our lights up and about, but were also very preoccupied with getting out of there. Like I said, we were only perhaps a few hundred feet from the entrance of the forest, so it took no time at all to get out. The moment we stepped out of the forest and into the light of a nearby street lamp, the forest fell dead silent, not a rustle, not a whisper. For those of you wondering, there are not any wild monkeys in these woods, nor anything else I could think of that would make those sounds. But that mess was so loud and obviously very terrifying. The third and final time I worked up the courage to go ghost hunting and find these evil little monkeys once and for all sealed the deal with me. I will never forget what happened on that night. A few months or perhaps a year or so after our encounter with the angry monkeys, I was still upset that I had never encountered the red-eyed Sasquatch thing, and convinced myself that the prior experience was probably just some rabid foxes or something. It wasn't. My older brother agreed to go out into the woods one last time with me as he didn't really fear anything, and to be honest, neither did I. I was some edgy-ass 15 or 16-year-old anyway, and this time, if I heard them yelling at me, I was just gonna yell at them back and demand them to show themselves, or something, I don't know. I just wanted to prove to myself that that night really happened, and I wasn't just crazy. The setting was perfect, a full moon. and it was about 2 a.m. My brother brought a couple of knives and throwing knives, and I brought a large quarterstaff. We set out on our little adventure. From the very start, things were different from the previous encounter for the better. There was no unnatural feelings or being watched. No sense of fear or dread, no sense of panic. We walked all through the woods, sticking to the major paths, the occasional cricket chirp, and the sounds of the nearby creek flowing downriver were the only noises we heard. At one point, a bush I was walking past bristled, and something fled away, causing me to almost piss myself. But I figured it was probably a raccoon or fox or something that we had spooked. After about an hour of pointlessly walking around, we decided to pack it in. As we started heading back home, my brother would occasionally stop in the path and begin listening intensely. For what I didn't know, as I heard nothing around us, was just he thought he heard something. A few minutes later, he stopped and grabbed my arm tightly. I looked up at him and asked what was the big idea, as we were almost out of the forest and I just wanted to get home at this point. He quickly hushed me and told me to shut up, so I did. Then he whispered someone was following us, though he never once turned around or anything. At that precise moment, I caught the worst goosebumps of my life and felt the presence staring at us from behind. I very slowly began to turn and look behind us. As I did, I saw, a shadow or silhouette literally creeping up behind us. The best way to describe what I saw was an 8-foot tall figure with glowing red eyes, silently walking down the path towards us. Once I saw that I had seen it, it immediately crouched low and dashed straight out of the path and into the tree line. At a full sprint, but without making a noise and straight at us, I remember just yelling at my brother, "Run." And we ran. This thing started chasing us. I had never felt more danger, more raw hatred emanating from someone or something before. I knew it was going to kill us, and we were sprinting for our very lives through the maze of a forest, and it chased us the entire way, just barely behind us. It must have been going fast to keep up, because we're booking it. I never turned around, nor did my brother, for that would have slowed us down a tiny bit. But we didn't have to, as we sensed it closing in. I could feel it reaching out to grab me, just inches keeping myself from it as I ran for dear life. At this point, we could also hear it clearly kicking up the gravel and dirt just inches behind us. Knowing there was no way we'd make it to the proper exit in time, I yelled at my brother to follow me on the main path, and through a small hidden trail that I knew from my childhood. Gloriously, we burst out of the forest and into the lighted dawn of what used to be my best friend's backyard. As soon as we got out of the forest and into the lights of the yard, we immediately stopped and turned to face our attacker. But it just stood there, just out of sight, and in the tree line, menacingly glaring at us. I never got a good view of it, not like I had when I first saw it on the trail creeping on us. But I could sense it was there, and almost barely see a large, almost 8-foot shadow moving amongst the tree line, staring us down. Full of adrenaline, I yelled at it to come out into the light and fight instead of creeping. I had my staff out in front of me, and my brother had a knife in each hand, and we were prepared to defend ourselves. Suddenly, something hit me in the chest. Stunned, I looked down to see a few pieces of gravel from the main path we were on earlier standing at my feet. It threw it at me. My brother saw it too, and immediately threw one of his knives into the forest from where the rocks came, and we turned and ran home. We've never been back at those woods since. and will never be caught in them past dusk, if I ever go back at all. I don't know if it was an angry hobo, or something living out in the woods, or what, but from memory, the best I can describe what I saw was a very large man figure creeping quietly up on us, and once it saw that I noticed it, it hunched down low and sprinted silently into the tree line, straight for us. I have never felt such danger or hatred in my entire life. I knew for a fact that whoever or whatever it was, it meant to do us great harm. I've since heard stories of crawlers and other such things, and perhaps this was an example of one. I don't know, but my brother swears on his life that he didn't set that up to scare us, or have anything to do with what happened, and that he was just as terrified as I was at that time. Oh, and he never did find his throwing knife. He actually went back to look for it in the morning. Unfortunately, my brother never got to see it. He said he heard and sensed it following us, but he never got a view of the thing. Anyway, I don't know what the deal is with that forest, but I highly recommend everyone to stay far away from it. For a skeptic, I can agree that it's unlikely it was a person. In fact, I'm certain it wasn't. I've always thought of it and referred to it simply as the creeper, and yes, it did have glowing red eyes. What do you think it could have been? Have any of you had similar encounters? Let me know, and I'll try to answer your questions as well. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please give a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Perhaps click the bell for notifications, and remember, hell is empty, and the devils are here.